All right, we're live on Sunday Chat, Joe Wrestling. This is Jay LaValle, and I have Laura Shovan here. How you doing, Laura?
Great, Jay. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm
Uh,
really glad to be able to catch up with you.
it's been a while, right?
It
I mean,
has been.
we've been exchanging emails all summer.
I feel like at this point we go way back.
We do. We really do, and it's so good to see you again because email. It's not as personal. This is really nice to see your face. And
You too.
how's everything been going through COVID?
I think it's been going okay. I have my two 20-somethings moved home. We moved to a new house about a year ago, and it was supposed to be our empty nest.
Literally,
So, like a lot of people, I have grown children back at home, which has actually been one of the positives. But it's been a lot. We had somebody in the family pass, and of course, grieving and funerals are very challenging right now. They're challenging anyway, but especially right now. And so those have been kind of like the ups and downs. I had a new book come out this year, which ended up being one of the positives for this year. And we're just grateful to have our home, have family, and to be doing okay.
that's great to hear. And congratulations on your book. That just came out in August, A
It
Place at the
came out
Table.
in August. Thank you. I will. Here it is.
Place at the Table.
Place the Table.
This
It's
is your
about
favorite
two
book.
girls who are both first generation American. And I didn't get a chance to ask you yet. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. I showed you my little wrestling room back there. I've been spending a lot of time here teaching
I
work.
saw your daughter getting you with an arm throw. She's like superhuman strength.
It's unbelievable.
Tossed you. Phew.
She asked me to wrestle her every once in a while, and I haven't shown her any moves. I taught her the rules and
Uh-huh.
what scores what, and she just figured it out. And so
Uh-huh.
she has fun, but she's into piano. She loves everything, and
She's very cute.
now it makes the your book so much more meaningful, and your book Takedown, it makes it so much more meaningful to me and to her because you signed a book for her. She is so excited to learn to read it.
Oh, I love that. It was very special when you both were at the launch party for the book. It's interesting about this book Takedown because when I was a wrestling mom, especially when my son was in middle school, I was already a writer. I wasn't published in the children's lit world yet, but I was a published poet. And I used to sit in the stands or on the sides at practice and just like have my writing notebook and write these little sketches, word sketches, just like an artist would do, of what I was hearing and listening to and observing about what was going on at practice and at the tournaments. And I always felt like I'm going to write a book someday. And I thought it would be about a boy and his nemesis, like the kid who always beat him, and what he does about that. And somewhere along the process, I was working on a scene, and this girl just showed up. This girl character showed up, and it happened to be about 2016 when I was starting on the book. And the Olympics were going on that summer, and Helen Maroulis, of course, was just making her way through the ranks of all the opposing wrestlers. And it just sort of made sense to change the original story idea and have it be about a boy and a girl who are assigned to be wrestling partners and really don't understand each other. The boy, has a lot of questions about if the girl is going to be strong enough to get him where he wants to go, which is states. And yeah, I think it kind of surprised me, but I mean, the timing was so right. And And when I ended up interviewing you and we became friends, I remember you invited me to the first all-girls state championship in Maryland, which was like such a fantastic experience to
Wow, that
see.
was 2015. I think that
15?
was I think that was an entire year before the Olympics happened. And so
I
you're
must have been working on the book sooner than I thought I was.
I think maybe you were. I'm thinking maybe it was 16, but that's amazing that it eventually evolved
Yeah,
into that. And we'll get into I want to definitely talk to you more about that. I'm so grateful to have been small part of that
a
process and
huge part.
learn about
Huge.
learn about what it takes, because I'm always interested in process and how things work. But I wanted to just introduce you again. You're a writer of 3 middle school books. You have obviously Takedown, A Place at the Table, and the last 5th grade of Emerson. And
Emerson Elementary, right?
Emerson Elementary, and you're also featured in 5 children poetry books.
Right.
You're involved in 3 adult poetry books and multi award winner of your work. So it's amazing that I had an opportunity to meet you and obviously have you on today. And I'm so happy that my viewers and my audience get to know you a little bit.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's one of the best parts for me about being an author, any kind of author. I love doing personal interviews like you're doing now. It's part of my process and how I do research. And I just feel very lucky when somebody sort of like comes along with me in life and isn't just attached to doing an interview for the book, but becomes a friend or someone that I correspond with. And I'm just really grateful that you and I have sort of stuck together and as buddies all this time.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of the journey.
Absolutely.
We meet people, we learn, and we continue learning. I know we were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Uh, it's such an awesome process. So, well, you got a little bit into, I guess
I
how.
jumped the gun.
Well, no, that's good. I got a little bit into how your book evolved, and we'll talk
Uh,
about it. But maybe tell us a little bit about how you even became interested in wrestling or how you were involved in wrestling.
right. So I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I know that it was my son was in 2nd grade and we got a flyer or something, and I think he was playing soccer year round, which, like, looking back, what were we thinking? The kid was playing sports year round. But he needed a break and we thought he might try wrestling, and he liked the idea. And I think I think he had a friend who went to the clinic with him. And I still remember, you're going to laugh at this, Jay, but at the end of the clinic when they did their demonstration match, Brian Chadwick was the referee, and Brian would later be Robbie's coach on Vipers for at least for a little while. So anyway, he fell in love with the sport. So the he did clinic for a while. He was on rec team. Eventually, he moved up to the travel team, and the sport was really, really good for him at the time. Around that time, our son was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, which is also sometimes called sensory integration. So, like, trying to think of how to word it. So, like, the messages from the senses are not always going to the brain the way a neurotypical kid would. And for him in particular, like, he wouldn't feel hungry. He wouldn't feel hungry until he was starving. So he was always really super skinny. But one of the areas where he needed more input on his senses was what they call proprioception. So, like, pressure on the muscles, and vestibular, which is the inner ear. So needing to spin. And it turned out that wrestling was like the perfect sport for him at the time, because he was getting all of this physical input on his body that really helped him just feel better and do better. And we always thought that during wrestling season, he always did better in school during wrestling season.
That sounds
Then the
about
wrestling season would be over, and that was a different story. But it was a really good sport for him at the time, and he just so identified with being a wrestler. I remember he came home one day in middle school and told this story, and I don't know what happened, but they were doing something in PE class that he didn't want to do. And the poor teacher, the poor PE teacher went up to him and was like, you're not doing this thing. And he goes, I'm a wrestler. I don't need to do like whatever you're doing. Like, I'm fit. So he copped a little bit of an attitude.
nice.
But that's how we got involved. And there were two coaches on his rec league when we were sort of going through all this stuff and figuring out what I was describing with the sensory processing issues. They really took him under their wings, and they became really important people in his life and in our lives. So I think pretty early on, we just got that sense of when you've got a good coach who really cares about a kid, it can make so much difference in that kid's life.
100%. And everybody's going through something different. And your son obviously was impacted positively through the sport and through, great coaches that identified that.
Right.
That's amazing. And he was with the Vipers. I know the program very well. A lot of great guys and coaches and parents and athletes over there. So that's amazing. He got connected, and everything sort of happens for a reason, I guess. And
Yeah.
how long was he involved with wrestling?
So he wrestled from 2nd grade all the way through 8th grade, and then and when he transitioned to high school, he decided to step away from the sport, and that was hard. It was the right decision for him, but I guess, I don't know, Jay, maybe your daughter's a little young, you haven't had this experience yet, but you become so invested as parents in some of the activities that your kids do. And sometimes when they step away from those activities, it's a loss for the parents too, because you're not as active in that community anymore. It's part of your family routine. I mean, like, we did things like we bought a crock pot because we were at wrestling practice so much that I would make like a big crock pot dinner on Sunday night so that we could eat a hot meal during the week because we were always at wrestling practice. So because it impacts all of our lives, and I think that's one of the reasons, to be honest, why I wrote the book, is I just felt like there was something about the sport when my son stopped wrestling that I wasn't quite done with, or that I wanted to understand. And going back to it through the novel was really helpful to me to learn more about the sport in a way that I hadn't even as a parent.
Wow, that's amazing. And did the timeline sort of match up from the time that he was done in 8th grade to when you started thinking about the writing, or did the writing process take place before that?
I think, like I said, I used to keep all these notes, but I was working on a different book. I was working on my first children's book, The Last Fifth Grade of Emerson Elementary. And so I didn't, I'm trying to remember. I think that I would have pitched this book, Takedown, to my editor in about fall of 2015. So it was quite a while between, and I did really have to relearn the sport, and then came to know it better than I had as a parent. But there were a lot of things. That's one of the reasons why I did so many interviews and went to so many tournaments, because I think it had been 5 or 6 years since Robbie had wrestled, and I needed to just kind of get my brain in that
Immersion.
zone again, in the wrestling mom zone.
Immerse yourself in the culture,
Right.
hear the craziness of the whistles and
Oh my
parents
gosh,
screaming and coaches
so
screaming.
loud.
That is brutal. But there's something about it, like the chaos is. It seems like chaos if you're not used to it, but you just get used to it and sort of learn how to zone out that noise and focus in on what's
Right.
happening the mat, which
Yeah, sometimes I talk to other parents about it being a lot like being at an all-day swimming meet. You know, for kids who swim, that you're just there all day and it's so loud, and you know the kids are wandering around and you're trying to keep them fed and watching when their competition is, and then they're on for 3 minutes and they're done, and then you all take a breather and then the process starts all over again.
every weekend.
Yeah.
Sometimes twice a week.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing. Well, that's amazing that you 5 years after, about 5 years after your son was gone, you drew inspiration from somewhere and you started to tell us a story. I'm sorry I cut you off,
Oh
but
no, it's okay. I can't remember what I was saying, so.
of how you how you had the idea, and it was the boy, and
Right.
then somehow the girl entered the picture. How does that sort of happen? Were you writing and then you imagine that?
Yeah, I was writing a scene where the main character Lev, which is this guy here, he was at a dual meet, and it was one of those situations where one of the other teams it might have even have been a quad meet in this part that I was writing. So one
Right.
of the other teams didn't have a kid at a certain weight and they asked to borrow him, right? Which people outside of wrestling don't understand how that works, but you know, it's something that we do. And he went, and I'm describing this like these are real people because these characters are so real to me. So he went over to sit on the bench or in the chairs with this team with kids he didn't know, and this kid starts talking to him like, who are you? Are you good? Like, are you going to win for our team? And that character turned out to be Mickey, the other voice in the book, because it's in 2 points of view. And honestly, Jay, I have sort of the first scene when I realized this was a girl. I have this first scene that I wrote in her voice where she talks about her name and that her real name is Mikayla, but she goes by Mickey on the mat because she has these wrestling brothers and they think she needs to sound tougher. And that ended up being the very first chapter in the book. That's how the book opens. And that hasn't, I can't say that that's ever happened to me before, where a character has sort of walked onto the stage as I'm writing, and it's become clear very quickly that that character has a strong voice and needs to be one of the main people in the story.
That's truly amazing, that process that evolved from you already having sort of an idea of where your book was going to go to completely shift. I would say almost shifting gears,
Yeah.
and then it's probably you. I would imagine you probably had just a whole nother story after that.
I wish I could remember. I did have some ideas, but that's part of, as I'm learning more about the art of writing a novel, that's part of what happens is, for me anyway, at some point in the process, and this has happened with two of my three books. The most recent one is co-authored, so it's a little bit different. But whatever my initial idea was, there's some point where I have to tell myself, you're clinging to this idea because that was your first impulse, but the story, now that you've developed it, needs something else. Like it's turning into something else, and part of my job and my process as an author is to recognize that I've grown past the initial idea, and it can be sort of kicked away like a kickstand on a bike or like an on-ramp on the highway. I don't need it anymore. I'm up to speed now, and I can just go with the way the story is. So I think it's learning to trust and to recognize that sometimes the needs of the story you're telling are more important than whatever your initial impulse was, or trying to get a certain something in there and tuck it in, or even because I write for kids, telling a good story is more important than fancy, beautiful writing. Kids don't really always care about fancy, beautiful writing. They just want a good story with characters that they connect with.
Exactly. And did you pitch your book previously with the original story, or was it?
Oh gosh, that I don't remember. I think I did. I'm trying to remember that conversation that I had with my editor, and I think I did pitch it without the girl to start with.
So I'm curious, how did he feel about once you included the girls? Because girls wrestling, it's the fastest growing sport in the country, yet there's still this stigmatism around it,
Hmm.
which is, it's strange to me because I've been around it so long. And my second, maybe no, actually my first freestyle match I ever wrestled in high school was against a girl. And I had girls on my high school team back in the
Which
90s, so
is
it was
awesome. Yeah.
pretty normal to me.
Uh-huh.
But some people aren't exposed to it, so I'm curious how he initially, maybe was he receptive? He Oh, he must have been. He had to.
Yeah. So my editor is a woman named Wendy Lamb, who is wonderful, like really well-known, wonderful, award-winning editor, and I learned so much from working with her. I don't remember that conversation about changing the initial idea so that there were two points of view, and one of them, the boy and the girl. Um, I think that maybe my editor and her assistant might have been a little bit more reluctant about a wrestling story since they didn't know anything about the sport, but they trusted me to be able to tell a good story because I'd already done the other book, The Last Fifth Grade of Emerson Elementary, with them. So I think that trust was there, and I'm really grateful that that they gave me the space to tell this story because the book is really important to me. It went on to be named to this list called the Amelia Bloomer list, which is the American Library Association's list of feminist books for kids, and I was just really proud to have a book on that list. And
Really?
um, it got picked up because in the story Lev is Jewish, so it got picked up for a program called PJ Our Way, which comes from a foundation that promotes and distributes books to Jewish families. And I've loved being involved with that organization. I got involved with Wrestle Like a Girl for a while. So I feel like when in writing books, there's so much life to the stories beyond the books themselves. And like getting to know you, like um, the books, the books they're almost like an artifact. They're a thing that somebody can pick up and read, and that's wonderful. And I hear from readers about, what they enjoyed about the books and all of that. But at the same time, they add so much depth to my life by the people that I meet and the experiences that I have and the kids that I talk to. I mean, every once in a while, I'll get like an adorable picture of a girl in a singlet with a trophy who's like, yeah, takedown. And it always makes me feel so good that there's a story out there for those girls and their teammates.
100%. And you're absolutely right. The book carries a lot of depth for people, maybe who beyond the people who just pick it up and read it, and they can relate to the story, which is, and by the way, an amazing story. And now that I have a daughter that likes wrestling and she sees the book, she remembers the book opening, and she's so curious about the story. And I
Yeah.
haven't yet read it because I want her to sort of be able to read it on her own as well, and just get lost in the book, and learn that, the experience that girls can have in the sport of wrestling. But part of reaching out to you was really because she had picked the book up, and she's like, I remember going there, and it really triggered so many awesome memories with you, talking, sitting down with you.
Right.
Not even, I never felt like I was like teaching you. It was always just like a conversation like this, and you were always very inquisitive, and I'm like, I was so excited that you wanted to come to the tournaments and meet Kyle and Helen, and
Yeah.
it
Well,
was,
I was so grateful to you because sometimes, when I send an email out to somebody and say, I'm writing a book and I'd like to interview you, sometimes people put walls up, and that totally makes sense to me. I used to work as a freelance journalist, and sometimes people are afraid of like looking bad in an article, or that their words might get twisted. It's happened to me sometimes where, I was interviewed by somebody and they left out an important piece of context, and I'm like, ugh, it happened again. But I was very grateful because you were so inviting. And the minute I said I'm writing a book about youth wrestling, you were like, yes, I want to be part of that. Let's do it. We need this book. And I feel like you became a real partner, and not only reviewed the manuscript for me and did the interview, but encouraged me to come to some of those things, like the clinic with Kyle and Helen. And it was just fantastic to see the two of them working with kids. And Kyle ended up writing a blurb for the book, which was so kind of him.
I remember that. I remember that. And I feel like having you at those tournaments, having you around, it pushed me to be better at what I wanted to do to extend wrestling to people that maybe have never been in wrestling before.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always feel like we are very good at growing wrestling within ourselves and informing each other about wrestling, because we get super passionate about wrestling. It's fun to watch. We know all the people in it, and there's rivalries, and there's the great stories. But at the bottom, I shouldn't say the bottom, but you know, way down are those young kids that are going to eventually be people we're talking about, the people we listen to and watch and see go to the Olympics, like Kyle and Helen.
Mm-hmm.
So did you draw any inspiration from Helen's story? Because I think in August 2015, she had just won the national championship, I should say the world championships
Mm-hmm.
in Las Vegas. So that must have been very inspiring. I mean,
Yeah.
for us here, she's from Maryland. It was amazing.
Right. Yeah, I was following her story. I was reading a lot of interviews that she did. There's a big plot line. A big plot line in the story is about boys and some coaches who don't want to let their boys wrestle against Mikayla, the girl on the team. And I remember Helen doing an interview on that topic, and that eventually she had a coach who basically was like, we're not going to wrestle your team at all. Like, our whole team is not going to wrestle against your team unless Helen gets to wrestle. And that was really important, not only to me to hear that, but it also lent itself to the plot of the book. It's sort of like the backbone of the story is that there's a rival team where the coach and one of the main wrestlers is forfeiting every time she steps on the mat against them. And the if you look at just the plot without any character to it, which we don't do, but whatever, that's the main storyline, is what are they going to do to convince this other team that she deserves a chance to wrestle. Like, she's trained as hard as anybody else and she deserves a chance to wrestle. But I'm sure, Jay, you hear, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I've certainly heard with this book, adults say, like, boys wrestling girls, like they have to touch each other, like they sexualize it.
Yeah.
Or they get caught up in the gender stuff. And I remember actually at that clinic with Kyle and Helen, meeting with young wrestlers, and they had clearly been training together, and it was just like it was two athletes. So when people ask you about the gender, or they want to sexualize it, how do you address that with parents who are nervous about letting their girls wrestle?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it does get sexualized, unfortunately. And my response is wrestling is a sport for everybody, no matter what your gender is, no matter how big, how small, how strong, how fast. It's a sport for everybody, and it shouldn't be, I would say, looked at in a discriminatory way, especially because it's been predominantly a boys' sport, except at the high school level and the youth level, that it does it and it will, until I feel like there's more girls than boys wrestling, and it's
Hmm.
probably it's trending that way right now,
Hmm.
believe it or not.
I do believe
So
it.
it's becoming more commonplace that it's, I guess, viewed as anybody can wrestle, but at the same time, there's still pockets in the United States, and I'm sure in other
Hmm.
countries where girls wrestling or women's wrestling is growing, that it has the same sort of stigmatism that it has
Yeah.
in the United States.
Hmm.
But in the United States, boys' participation is declining at a rapid pace, believe it or not, in every sport, not just wrestling. And girls is just skyrocketing. As I said, it's the fastest growing sport. And my response is always, it's a sport for everybody.
Right.
And other countries around the world, they've been doing it for 20, 30 years or even longer. I mean, there's stories about, and I've really started taking more of an interest in studying the history of wrestling in other countries. And what I've been finding is, Mongolian wrestling has a long history,
Mm.
and their culture has historically just been a culture of conflict and battle, and what I found is women were wrestlers and warriors, but you don't hear that stuff. So
Right.
I think for a long time, stories like that get suppressed, and then later, that you start to hear about, maybe started coming back up through somebody's family, and those stories get shared. So I always, it's hard to hear. I don't hear it that often. I see it happen. I haven't directly experienced it, fortunately, but
Hmm.
you hear it all the time in the news that
Yeah.
boys don't want to wrestle girls, or a coach doesn't want their team wrestling a girl, it's it's probably going to continue happening. I feel like until there's probably until there's more girls wrestling,
Right.
unfortunately.
And there's so many layers to it. There's so many layers to
There is.
that. Um, Interesting. What was I about to say? It went back out of my brain. I'll think of it later. I was going to ask you a question about, can't remember.
That's all
It'll
right.
come back to me.
They'll come back. They'll come back.
Pandemic brain.
Exactly. We're all dealing with it. Um, but one thing I remember, one really like thing that I remember was reading your transcript like late at night and just being really excited about it. And I could, while I was reading it, and I was doing this on my phone in bed, but I would get really super excited about it and reading it and just wondering like, what is the process that goes into this? Because you and I had shared a lot,
Right.
phone calls, emails, and meetings, but I'm sure there was like way beyond me as well. And so, what kind of timeline and process goes into that, writing that?
Well, it took me, Takedown took me almost 2 years to write, which is actually the last fifth grade took much longer. But I like to do research. Not every author likes to do that, but like I said, I do a lot of personal interviews. I will take out every book from the library that I can find on a topic. So I really studied and relearned the sport. I watched a lot of um, high school tournaments on YouTube to kind of like reacquaint myself, and it's detail work too. There's a very short scene in the book, and I don't even think it happens. No, it does. There's a very short scene in the book where Mickey wrestles a kid who's blind.
Mm,
And I want to get that right. Like I really want to represent for the wrestlers. So, people who aren't familiar with wrestling, they wouldn't need me to go into detail in that scene. But I also wanted this book to be a book for people who are wrestlers. So I remember watching the video and having to relearn that, oh yeah, the ref has, when you're wrestling somebody who's blind, the ref has you put one hand up, one hand down, and you start from that position. So, and you're not allowed to take your hand off the person who's
right.
blind, so they always know where you are. And if you take your hand off, the ref stops the match and resets you. So Even for a short scene like that, when you're writing something or when I'm writing something that's realistic fiction, I want to get it as right as I possibly can, because if I get something like that wrong, if I get a detail like that wrong, it's going to take someone out of the story. And my job is to make the reader feel as immersed in the story as possible.
That's amazing. And were you able to talk to people that, or did you do research and find blind wrestlers that were able to share their story with
I
you?
don't think I did speak to anybody. I do, we had a few kids along the way when my son was wrestling who
Mm,
um, we either observed or he wrestled against somebody who had who was differently abled in one way or another. I'm trying to remember, we had a few kids on his teams over the years um, who had different either special needs or whatever it was. So I think, as you were saying before, because wrestling is a sport that welcomes all comers, unlike many other sports, you will see kids out on the mat who who are differently abled in one way or another, and it's just an accepted part of the sport, which in a way is part of what makes me crazy when people refuse to wrestle, to have a boy wrestle against a girl, because it's like, you the sport is so welcoming of everybody, and it's this gender thing is,
yeah,
I
that
don't get it. I don't get it.
is frustrating because you're right, sport is inclusive. In fact, Kyle Maynard comes to mind too. I mean, there's been in Maryland we had a blind person, we had deaf wrestlers, but Kyle Maynard was one that like really reminds me that wrestling's for everybody. He was a congenital amputee, so he didn't have arms or legs,
Hmm.
and he was a wrestler. I mean,
Hmm.
in Georgia, he qualified for the state tournament. Not that that matters, but the fact that he was included, he felt like he could do it. He
Right.
wanted to do it. Be like just like anybody else, have that opportunity.
Hmm.
And I feel like for girls, it's the same thing. They want to have the opportunity that just like a boy has to be able to do an awesome sport. And it's definitely becoming more acceptable for sure. But we still have work to do. Wrestle Like a Girl is out there. They are doing a phenomenal job.
Hmm.
You bring more awareness. I think that's the number one thing. Like when you asked me that question earlier about how would you respond, it's an inclusive sport, but many people probably still ask that question. They probably because they don't know they don't
Right.
know that girls could actually wrestle and they can do anything boys can do.
And it's, I think about it just from a wrestling standpoint, as a coach, like, you want to have a girl on your team. Like, you want your guys to be used to wrestling against a girl, because they're going to see girls on the mat. So you're better off having that experience, and having the girls just be part of an everyday part of the sport for the guys on your team, because they are an everyday part of the sport.
I think for some, I think the biggest thing maybe that because there's opposition is that boys are afraid they're gonna lose and
And lose face.
yeah, become emasculated and just be embarrassed by it. But
Right.
no different than losing to a boy. I mean,
No.
it's really the same thing, and I think that's probably maybe one of the biggest things, and maybe because it does become sexualized that that part of it I don't understand. I don't understand that.
I don't understand it
The,
either.
the challenge for the individual, because it's such an inclusive sport, wrestling in itself is an inclusive sport. There's that battle, and the original premise of your book was just a battle. Originally it was
Right.
a boy, and then it became about Mickey.
Right. Yeah.
Even just the other day, I asked my daughter, did you have any dreams? I ask her every morning, and she tells me. And this particular day, this was a couple of weeks ago, actually. I asked her, hey, what did you dream about last night? And she said, well, there was a monster, and I ran away. I ran up a tree, and the monster found me, and I was scared, and so I hid. And I said to her, well, if a monster's coming at it, why don't you wrestle it? Why don't you wrestle it and beat it just like you beat me? Because she beats me all the time. She beats me all the time, and I told her you can just wrestle it, and it will leave you alone. Because that's what
Uh-huh.
bullies. And this is a great thing about wrestling because it teaches you to stand up for yourself, be
Yes.
strong, self-reliant. And I was just amazed because the next day she told me, yeah, I wrestled the monster and it was gone and it went away.
Hey.
And I said, that's what happens when you stand up to a monster, which isn't real. She knows they're not real, but she's obviously having them as a 5-year old. But that's what's going to happen when there's a bully. And if the bully doesn't get stood up, they're going to keep coming after you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really nice lesson that didn't even have to relate to, I guess, being on the mat. It was just that mindset.
Right. Like you're capable.
You're capable of being this strong person, and wrestling is just a vehicle. It's just a vehicle to
Right.
help you overcome, your fears.
Hey, you're just reminding me too, though, of like we don't talk often enough about how much fun the sport is. I just remember like I was saying, when my son was going through a really difficult time, at the end of practice, like playing dodgeball or playing steal the bait, like those sort of like little traditions that are connected with the sport. Getting the pins to wear on the jacket when they were in rec. They didn't do it in travel league, but like the kids were so proud of those pins with the little safety pins hanging off.
Well,
What are some of your favorite traditions like that are just like more on the fun side?
um, one that comes to mind because it just happened. It just happened the other day. Is I was assistant coach at Mount St. Joe, and every year, right around this time, actually, this was this week. Every year, this week, all the college kids are back, and they all come back to Mount St. Joe, and it's just like a reunion,
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
it's just fun. It's fun to see them all again, and I've been there since 2013 now, so, and I knew most of them even before that.
Hmm.
But then once they're there, that camaraderie comes back. It's generations and I mean, there's multiple generations of athletes there, and then we all probably play dodgeball. And that's like you said, that's a
Yeah.
part of the sport. Actually, we do handball.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like dodgeball. And then it's always those greetings. Wrestlers are always greeting each other with an underhook or a 2-on-1 or grab their hand. And so it's always ends up like the greeting ends up being like into a
Yeah.
wrestling move. And so that's one that I really enjoy. And it just popped up on my Facebook memories. So,
Oh, nice. So
and you,
what are you doing? Because obviously we can't have wrestling right now. So what are wrestlers doing during the pandemic?
believe it or not, um, wrestling has wrestling hasn't stopped.
Hmm.
Somehow it's sustained itself since, I'd say, since about June. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
was a lag where there was nothing happening, but um, I would say since June, a lot of places have stayed open under the protocols that the governors have set. But I talked to one of my students. I teach on Zoom. I
Mm-hmm.
teach virtual wrestling on Zoom. So that was
Hey.
that was my way of pivoting and giving back to wrestling and keeping athletes engaged that either they couldn't go back to wrestling because they didn't have wrestling available, or they, like me, they decided not to go back even though
Right.
they could. And so I have several like that. And I got on Zoom and it just grew into this, I don't know, it grew into this thing that I never imagined I'd be doing it, but I'm still doing it, 6 or 7 months, more than that, 6 or 9 months, might
Wow.
be 8 months. Oh my gosh. But it's just evolved. And in fact, I got 2 girls on there. Um,
Awesome.
one from Kansas, one from Maryland, and the one in Kansas is actually wrestling right now.
Mm-hmm.
She's having a hard time, and um, I'm grateful that she can go on because then she can see all these other. She can, number one, she can see another girl is on here working her
Mm-hmm.
butt off, trying to improve and get better, and then the other one in Montgomery County, they canceled the winter sports completely.
Mm-hmm.
So it is frustrating, and I feel because they're already doing virtual learning in school, and then on top of that, they have to do virtual wrestling. So it's challenging to say the least, and I've been fortunate because it's kept me going because
Right.
it was my decision not to go back, just for out of respect to my family and other people who may be exposed to it. I don't. Who knows if I contracted along the way, and um, so it's been good. I've been able to keep it going out of the demand, but also they've motivated me to keep it rolling. And one of my students actually was on tonight virtually, and he was so excited because he just went back to wrestling this week after
Awesome.
like 9 months of
Oh my gosh.
9 months of being with me, which is it was sort of his way of saying thank you. Like he stopped me at the end and he's like, when everybody else got off the Zoom call, and he's like, "Thank you. I finally got back. I'm gonna stay on here as much as I can, but I'm back in the wrestling world."
Hey.
Yeah, so it's been challenging, and but at the same time, it's opened up a lot of opportunities, and I think it
Yeah, I mean, we've all learned so much, like even just using Zoom as an outlet, you know.
100%. And then these Sunday chats evolved. You're my third, and I have a few more coming, but again, I'm so
I
excited
I
about.
am honored. Thank
It.
you for including me.
I wanted to ask you though, um, 30 months ago, your book was published about
It
July
was
2000,
July of 2018,
July 2018, and my daughter, she was only 3.
right?
Um, there was this clinic that you invited me to host, which I'm grateful for, which was absolutely amazing at the Ivy bookstore in.
That's right. It was the book launch event. And it was so hot that day, but we set up a tent in the courtyard and you and I'm gonna forget the other person's name from Beat the Streets, but you'll remember.
Lydell brought in a couple
Yeah,
of.
Lydell, and that we had a brother and sister who were high schoolers, and then two little mighty mites, a boy and a girl, to do the wrestling demonstration under the tent. And the mats were there. It was awesome. I think it was just really memorable for people. And again, because a lot of my readers wouldn't have seen wrestling before, live wrestling before. So um, yeah, it was really fun. And I was so glad that you were part of it. And I still remember you were coaching and showing people moves, and your daughter was on your back. Like she wanted to be right in there with you.
That was funny. That was coincidental though how everything played out because the brother and sister, Heidi and Cord, it's almost like they were representing your book. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing how it all happened. And they're obviously they had been my students for quite a long time. I keep in touch. Cord's down in South Carolina in college, and Heidi, I think Heidi's a senior now. But it's just so amazing how that everything sort of gelled and came together like that.
Yeah.
But 2 years ago, well, 30 months ago, and how was the initial reception of Takedown?
Um, I feel like one of the things that happened, I was saying before, this program PJR Way came out with a special edition for Jewish families, and so some of the initial response that I was getting was from that program.
Mm.
And I remember there was one boy in particular. it was my very first Zoom interview, actually. He asked me if he could interview me on Zoom through that program, and it was so much fun to connect with him. And he wanted to be an author someday, and just to kind of like encourage him about writing and being an author. So I I feel like I would love more people to read this book, but the people who read it, I feel really like the story. And I do hear, at least once a month or so from a kid or a parent or a grandparent who's in the wrestling community and just says, thank you for, it's just hard to find stories about wrestling, or how do I want to say it? It's hard to find stories where wrestling's embedded in the story. It's almost like the setting of the story is youth wrestling, but it's also just a good story about characters who I think are believable and relatable, and that's I think that's why people enjoy reading the book. And it has its funny parts, it has its serious moments. I was showing you before, there's a scene in the book where Mikayla says to her friends, how do you think it feels for me when I go to a tournament and all of the trophies have guys on top, like they're all trophy boys? How do you think that makes me feel? And they hatch a plan to pull a prank where they take a trophy and they make it look like a girl is on top, and then they sort of like plant it at the tournament and see if anybody's going to notice. So when that happened, I had to figure out if I could actually take it, if this was doable, like if a kid could take a trophy. And so I called my poor son and said, can I have one of your old trophies? And he was like, oh my God, what is mom going to do now? But then this was how I figured out that I could do it. So this is, her name is Tiffany. We call her Tiffany.
Nice.
She's got sparkly socks, wrestling socks, and her pink wrestling boots, just like Mickey has pink wrestling boots in the book. She's got a ponytail.
Nice.
So that's like research. I have to know in my own head if something is believable, if it's true. And so I had to find out if I could use nail polish and doctor a trophy, because it's something that happens in the book.
But that's amazing. That was just something that came to mind. I mean, did you have inspiration for that, or have you?
You know what's funny is this is an example of when you're working with a good editor. So I had a part in the book where Mickey said to Lev and the other characters, how do you think it feels for me? And someday I'm going to take a trophy and I'm going to paint it and make it look like a girl and see if anybody notices. And my editor was the one who said, not someday, you have to write that scene. Like, I want to see that as a scene. So that's when a good editor can really encourage you to say, like, oh, you had an idea there, but you haven't taken it far enough. So
That is an interesting process in writing.
Yeah.
And somebody else gets eyes on it, and well, your editor, and yeah, take this further.
Right.
Make this scene happen. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good editor, and that happens often. Like, you get an idea and either you don't trust it, or you're just like, oh, it's just a throwaway. It's not, she's going to mention this, but sometimes it's the editor who says, no, this is something you need to develop a little bit more. It has potential to be important or special. But then there are other times, like, I don't know, Jay, in the version that you read, I had this whole scene in the book where Lev and his sister drive out to Ocean City, Maryland in the wintertime. Like, they just need some time away. They're both really hurting over different things. And I loved this scene so much. I can tell you, like, I know exactly what restaurant they go to get something to eat, and they go sit on the beach, and they have this wonderful brother-sister bonding moment. And I had to cut it. I had to cut the whole scene from the book. It just didn't move the story forward. It was important to me because it spoke to Lev's relationship with his sister, but it didn't move the plot forward at all. So sometimes I develop this whole thing and it ends up being cut.
Wow. But you have other experiences in the book where your editor also encouraged you to push the story forward, and
Yeah, exactly.
that's amazing part of.
An editor is like a coach.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. It is a process. So it was a 2-year process,
Yeah,
and amazing, amazing. I'm so grateful to have been part of it,
I'm so
and
thankful.
then sit here with you right now and still talk about it, because when we're in those moments, it's, at least for me, when I was in that moment, I'm like, I still felt the same. Like, I'm so grateful I can share, what I'm going through with wrestling, and then answer obviously in your questions. But
Right.
um,
And you were
there's
so
something.
generous about introducing me to lots of people who I either interviewed or met or spoke to. And
Were
I
you at
was,
the You were at the Olympic celebration
no.
with Kyle and Helen.
Was that what that was? When
Yeah.
we were at the hotel and all
Yes.
the kids were gathered around?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you were there. I was, again, like, it's so coincidental that all this stuff sort of happened,
Yeah, the
and
timing was pretty wild.
they had just won Olympic gold medals. Both of them won Olympic gold medals in Rio, and they're
Yeah.
both from Maryland. And you're from Maryland.
Yeah. I think, and Kyle is actually the same age as my son, and I can't say that they ever wrestled each other, but I remember them the kind of like being at the same tournaments and stuff like that. So I remember seeing Kyle's name you know, when they were all in middle school together.
Amazing. Yeah, Kyle was with the Warhawks for a little bit,
Uh-huh.
and
That
so
was our arch nemesis, Jay.
there you go. Yeah, definitely.
The
Yeah,
Warhawks and the Vipers.
Vipers
Mm-mm.
and the Warhawks were back and
Oof.
forth. Heated rivalries.
It was very heated rivalry.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for having you on, and I just wanted to ask you one more thing.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to have Mickey come back?
Oh, I don't have any plans right now. Gosh, Jay, I would have to learn the sport. It's been so many years now, I'd have to learn the sport all over again for the third time. I'm working on a different novel right now. It's set in Maryland, but it has how do I want to say? I'll just say it's set in the future, not in the distant future, but it's set in the future, and it's about another girl who learns to find her own strength. So that's all I'm going to say about it. But I'm working on something new,
Oh,
and
that's great.
it's my first. I've written short stories and stuff before that have been speculative or not. I don't want to call it science fiction, but speculative, let's say. But for as far as novels for kids, this will be my first one that's not like a realistic contemporary story.
Wow. So you're excited about that one.
I am excited, and it puts me right back into doing lots of research.
Very nice. That's the crux of it, though. That's part of the big process, I feel like.
It is, because that's like we were saying before, that's where I get my learning. That's where I get my my brain sparks from learning something new, is trying a new genre and also learning a new topic for this book. So
That's
that's
wonderful.
part of the fun. Keeps me I don't want to say keeps me out of trouble, because that might not be true, but it keeps it keeps the brain active. It keeps me working, and I really love that part of being an author.
The immersion in anything is gonna, I feel like, bring out new ideas, and potentially maybe new people that you never even thought of reaching out to, or
Right, exactly.
things like that.
Yeah.
Where can, I know we're coming up on the holidays, and we're crunch, but if somebody wants to get your book, Takedown,
Yeah.
where can they get this wonderful book?
So it's available at all the online retailers. I will share that I'm shopping at an online retailer called bookshop.org, because they donate money to struggling independent bookstores. So if you're going to order it online, I recommend bookshop.org. And signed copies are available from the Ivy Bookshop's website. But also, if you have a copy or if you buy a copy and you would like it signed, I have brand new book plates. And if you reach out to me through my website, I'd be happy to send a signed book plate, and I'll write it out to whoever you're giving the book to as a gift, or just a signed copy, because we can't meet and I can't sign a book for you in person right now. Sorry.
That is wonderful to hear, because I appreciate my copy that is signed.
What did I write in your copy, Jay?
It says, "TJ, Takedown is a better book because of your support, feedback, and enthusiasm. I can't thank you enough." This was June 24th. That was I think
Oh,
that
that was the celebration.
you wrote that day. I remember actually.
I agree with myself. Everything I wrote that day is still true.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your time. I know it's getting a little late. The fire is
The fire died. Oh my goodness.
but
Oh wait, I saw a flicker.
oh,
It was a flicker.
A bit. Anything you want to share? Anything else you want to share with the viewers before we?
Oh, is there anything else I want to share? I guess what I want to say is especially to kids who are wrestlers, or who are, into sports or whatever activities that you're into, as I feel like that we tend to put so much pressure on ourselves. And I hear from kids a lot who want to be authors, like, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to make this work? And I always want to say to kids, especially like upper elementary and middle school kids, the best thing you can possibly do at this time in your life to get where you want to go is to be a kid, and try new things and experience the things that you can, because if you grow up and you want to be an author, you've collected all of those experiences. If you're going out on the wrestling mat, you've tried new things, and you're better able to shift and adapt to a new situation. So I feel like I just want to remind kids that their job, if at all possible, is to just experience being a kid, and learn what you can from that, and take that with you to whatever activities or things you're interested in, and it just will make for a richer experience.
That's great advice. I really like that. Kids often do get caught up in the end result, the success, having
Right.
success in the end result, and forget about the process is like the best part.
Right, exactly. And I wish that I had better perspective on that when my kids were the age of the kids in this book. And I feel like, having a little bit more perspective would have been helpful to us when our kids were in sports, and maybe helped them to stay in sports a little bit longer, just for the joy of it, instead of feeling like you always had to take home the W.
Right. And that's the challenge, even as a coach now, is the same exact thing. And because we do get caught up in the W's, and there's just so much more beyond that.
Yeah.
That's great closing advice. I really appreciate your time, and I know I'll be catching up with you here again soon.
Well, it was very special to sit by the fireside with you, wearing your holiday sweater.
Thank you so much. I
I'm
hope
so glad we had a chance to talk.
Me too. I hope you have a wonderful holiday.
Thanks, Jay. You too. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year. Talk to you soon.